It's simple. I want to see you have as much success with your turnkey rental property that you've just purchased as possible. So, what are the things that you can do to help maximize your success with a property? It's three things. And these three things are the three biggest places where I have seen people go wrong, including myself. These three things are the absolute top game changers in my mind that make or break your turnkey rental property, whether immediately after you buy it or soon thereafter, or even down the road. So, what are those things? Number one, I want you to be willing to fight any charges that come up that shouldn't. Now, this isn't going to pertain to very far in the future of owning the turnkey, but let's say you've just bought your turnkey and within 90 days or within a year, some major repair happens that should have been covered under the rehab since it's a turnkey. Even if you're outside of the scope of work warranty that you were given by the provider, if it's in a short amount of time, open up the lines of communication with the provider and at least tell them the situation and ask their opinion. Don't come flying in aggressively out of the gate, but ask them, kind of fish around and see if they might be willing to help you on this. I see so many people have things come up that absolutely should be covered by the provider or even blatantly fall under the scope of work warranty, and the people just pay the expense and don't go to the provider and ask about it. Be willing to fight charges that you should not be covering. If you're not totally clear on what I'm talking about with the scope of work warranty, I'm going to link to a video below that you can check into and see more about these scope of work warranties. Basically what they are is if it should have been covered in the rehab or it's included in the scope of what they're supposed to fix, if something goes wrong with that pretty quickly, they're going to cover it. But check out that video for more details. So, be willing to fight the charges that you should not be covering yourself. Number two, if a big ticket item happens, and this is at any point in the ownership of your turnkey property, and this is for any rental property, if any major damage happens or major thing happens, be willing to file insurance on it. I have a turnkey example. I checked in with an investor who had bought a turnkey a couple of years before. I think it was in Indianapolis. And I was like, hey, how's your property going? And he was like, oh, pretty good, but the cash flow hasn't been as high as I was expecting. And I was like, well, what's happened? Why not? And one of the things he said is that there was, I think the dishwasher or something flooded, ruined the floors, and he had to pay $7,000 for new floors. And I was like, come again? Dishwashers exploding are the number one way to get brand new floors for free. Insurance covers things like that. If something like that happens, that's an insurance claim. Now, don't go swinging the pendulum to the other side where you file insurance claims on every single thing possible because your rates will go up. It doesn't work that way. But for big ticket items like $7,000 worth of flooring, just pay your deductible and let your insurance company cover it. You'd be oddly surprised at how many people I talk to who filing an insurance claim, it doesn't even really register as a possibility. It's one of the biggest tools in your arsenal. Use it when appropriate. Be willing to let the insurance company cover the big things so you aren't having to cover it. Third thing, and this is the one that I've been the worst at. This is why I'm so unfortunately familiar with it. Hands down, absolutely. And this goes from the minute you own the property to 10 years down the road and everywhere in between. Be willing to fire a bad property manager. And this does not mean wait 6 months to do it. I have a recent example, and it's an unfortunate example. A lot of turnkeys now are being sold without tenants. That's a new thing starting in, 2019 to 2020 when turnkeys got really high in demand. They're not always being sold without tenants or with tenants now. So a particular provider I was working with was selling properties without tenants, and the property manager that they had on staff to fill the vacancies and manage the property was not very good. It proved later that he was actually terrible. None of us knew how terrible he was for a while. However, That is unfortunate in itself. But where I saw a lot of those owners go wrong, early, a couple months into them owning the property, it was pretty clear that things were not going well with this property manager. There weren't a lot of showings, there wasn't a lot of interest, there was no sign of getting tenants quickly. And at that point, it was most critical to get tenants quickly. My encouragement to everyone was, hey, you might want to call up a couple different property management companies. If this property manager is not doing his job, you gotta come on, do it quickly. And a couple of those investors did not take my advice. And they had their reasons for not taking it. They're like, he's been communicating, he's been in touch, we'll kind of see how this goes. Okay, fast forward another couple months. Same thing's happening. I was like, hey, have you thought about calling another property manager? And they're like, yeah, I probably will. Fast forward another couple months. All of a sudden, we're 6 to 8 months into these people owning these properties. There's no tenants. There's hardly any showings. Now, because the properties have been sitting, the yards are in bad shape. There's been vandalism. Hello, this compounding, spiraling shit show is what they all turned into. What has become so expensive for these investors. And they were finally, at that point, like, oh, well, I think I'm going to go ahead and talk to another property manager. Okay, a lot of that is unfortunate. You have to move faster than that. If a property manager is just blatantly not performing, whether it's they're not getting tenants. Now, there's other ends of the spectrum. Don't assume they're going to get tenants overnight and be pissed off when they don't. But you can tell the difference between a property manager who's actively doing well in screening tenants, there's interest in the property, they're communicating well with you, versus one who the communication's not great, there's not a lot of showings, things are just falling by the wayside. If that situation comes into play, you have got to get rid of that property manager. And where I've gone wrong over the years, it's a little bit different than the scenario I just gave you. There seems to be a cycle with property managers. They're great, and then everyone uses them, but then they grow too fast, and then they just start to suck. And when they start to suck, I'm kind of like, hey, why are you starting to suck? And they're like, oh, sorry, this happened. It'll get better. Promise. In 0% of the cases has it ever gotten better when it hits that point. And what I've done, because I'm a sucker, is I believe what they tell me about things are going to get better. Well, I wait, and kind of similar to that other story of the property sitting around, things only start to compound and start to spiral. And at the point I finally realized, oh, I got to get rid of that manager, I have endured a lot of expense, whether it's through bad tenants or the property hasn't been taken care of or there's extended vacancies, something has gone wrong. And because I waited so long, I now have to take on all that expense, and then a new property manager has to clean that whole mess up. So you have got to be willing to fire a bad property manager and hire a new one in a decent, efficient, quick amount of time. Not too quick, but a quick amount of time. Do not wait. I have never seen waiting go well. Whew, that one is stressful. I could feel myself. So let's go back here. Let's talk about these 3 things I just said. If you'll notice a theme with all of them, it's really a willingness to be proactive to solve a problem, to spare yourself an expense. So number 1, be willing to fight charges that are not yours and that you should not be responsible for. That only kind of happens in the early days of turnkeys. Number 2, be willing to file an insurance claim. It's why you pay for insurance. And number 3, be willing to fire a bad property manager and hire a new one. If that seems like an intimidating task, it can be, but I recorded a whole video to help you with that. So I'm going to link to that below as well. So check that out on how to fire a property manager and hire a new one. Okay, the good news about those kind of negative feeling things, and by kind of I mean terribly negative feeling, is if you're willing to do those 3 things, I, as much as I can, guarantee you that the entire fate of your turnkey investment can change for the better. When you're not willing to do one or more of those things, it's when everything starts to go south. So stand up, get tough, crack your neck, get ready to be proactive, be willing to do those things, be willing to be proactive. And if you promise to do that, I promise that you're going to see a difference in your turnkey investment. Whew.